There's a certain kind of silence suburban neighborhoods have after midnight. Not peaceful silence either, the fake kind. The kind where every porch light feels judgmental and every curtain hides somebody pretending not to watch you. That's exactly what it felt like the night I came home and found a 6-foot fence blocking my driveway like somebody had dropped a prison wall in the middle of my life. I remember the exact sound my brakes made too, tires grinding against gravel, headlights washing over fresh cedar boards so new they still looked wet. For a second my brain genuinely couldn't process what I was seeing. I just sat there gripping the steering while staring at this massive privacy fence stretched perfectly across the entrance to my property like some cartoon villain had built it while I was gone. Then I noticed the laminated notice zip-tied dead center, flapping slightly in the wind like it was proud of itself. Unauthorized driveway closure. Property line enforcement. Unauthorized. That word hit me so hard I actually laughed out loud inside the truck. Not because it was funny, but because sometimes anger gets so ridiculous your brain doesn't know what else to do. My driveway. Unauthorized. My family had been driving over that gravel longer than most people in that neighborhood had even owned homes. My grandfather laid those stones himself back in the late 70s with an old rusted wheelbarrow and a bad knee he complained about until the day he died. Every Christmas, every birthday, every family barbecue, every late-night grocery run, every scraped bicycle knee from my kids learning to ride, all of it happened on that driveway. And now apparently some HOA board decided they could erase 40 years of history because they got bored during a committee meeting. I stepped out of the truck and walked toward the fence slowly, trying to stay calm, but I could already feel that heat building in my chest. Fresh concrete still sat around the posts. They had built this thing recently, probably that same afternoon, which meant somebody knowingly waited until I was gone to do it. That part bothered me more than the fence itself. It wasn't just aggressive, it was calculated. I pulled the notice down and found a phone number at the bottom. I called immediately. 3 rings. A man answered with the relaxed confidence of somebody who had never been punched in the mouth by consequences before. "This is Clayton." His voice had that polished HOA tone, fake professional mixed with neighborhood superiority. I said, "Why is there a fence blocking my driveway?" There was a pause. Then this guy actually sighed like I was inconveniencing him. "Ah, yes," he said calmly. "That issue was resolved this afternoon by board authorization." Board authorization. I swear HOA people talk like they're commanding military operations instead of arguing about mailbox colors. I told him that was my property access point, that my family had used it for decades, and this man actually chuckled under his breath before saying, "Technically, your driveway crosses association land." The board voted unanimously to reclaim that section. Reclaim. Another word designed to sound noble while doing something slimy. I could already picture him sitting in some oversized leather chair feeling important because he got elected president of a suburban homeowners association with 19 active members and too much free time. I told him there was a recorded easement attached to my deed. His response came instantly, way too fast, like he'd rehearsed it in advance. The board reviewed that situation and determined the easement is no longer enforceable. Determined? I almost admired the confidence. Imagine waking up one day and deciding county property law is just a suggestion because your neighborhood committee had a vote beside the cheese platter. Then he hit me with the part that really made my blood boil. "You may apply for alternate access through the North Service Road." Apply. Alternate access. Like I was asking permission to enter my own home. The North Service Road wasn't even a real road. It was basically a muddy drainage path hidden behind overgrown trees that flooded every spring and turned into a swamp every time somebody sneezed near a rain cloud. During winter, you needed 4-wheel drive just to survive it. And this guy expected my wife to haul groceries and my kids through that mess because his HOA board suddenly decided my driveway offended their aesthetic vision. I remember looking at the fence while he talked, fresh sawdust still scattered across the gravel, and realizing something important. This wasn't really about property lines. This was personal. See, about 6 months earlier, I'd publicly pushed back during an HOA meeting after Clayton tried introducing fines for non-uniform landscaping, which basically translated into punishing homeowners whose lawns didn't look like chemically enhanced golf courses. I told him the whole thing was ridiculous, that people should care more about paying mortgages than satisfying the visual fantasies of retired control freaks. The room got awkwardly quiet after that. Clayton smiled at me during the meeting, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind people use when they've mentally added your name to a list. Looking back now, the driveway was revenge. Plain and simple. This is a psychological trap a lot of HOA boards fall into. They stop separating governance from ego. Once disagreement feels personal, authority becomes emotional, and emotional authority always turns dangerous eventually. I hung up before I said something that would have ended up quoted in court documents later. Then I just stood there in the dark staring at the fence while neighborhood porch lights glowed faintly around me. Somewhere a dog barked. Sprinklers clicked on in the distance. And I had this strange moment where the entire neighborhood suddenly felt different, colder somehow. Like I wasn't looking at homes anymore, I was looking at territory. I barely slept that night. Around 2 in the morning, I went digging through old storage boxes in the garage, opening dusty file cabinets that hadn't been touched in years. Tax records, insurance papers, old utility bills, faded family photos, and finally, buried beneath a stack of documents inside a cracked manila folder, I found it. The original easement agreement. Official county recording stamp still visible in dark blue ink. Permanent right-of-way access attached directly to the property deed. Completely legal. Completely enforceable. Completely ignored by the HOA. I sat there at my kitchen table staring at the paperwork while the coffee machine hissed behind me, and slowly, very slowly, I started smiling. Because at that exact moment the entire situation changed. This wasn't about whether I could remove a fence anymore. This was about whether I could make an arrogant HOA board regret underestimating the wrong homeowner. And trust me, I absolutely could. Alright, before I dive back into swinging hammers and phone calls, let me break down why this is such a big deal. Because a lot of people don't realize how HOA rules actually work versus how they feel they work. From a legal perspective, an HOA is not some magical entity that can erase decades-old property rights just because they think your driveway is ugly. According to standard procedure, a recorded easement, like the one my grandfather secured when he laid that driveway, exists at the county level, which means it survives HOA votes, board changes, and even neighborhood elections. This is a psychological trap most boards rely on. They send official-looking notices, add legal-sounding jargon, and expect homeowners to panic or comply without checking the facts. But the reality is simple. If your access has been legally granted, any attempt to block it is technically trespassing and a violation of county regulations. The lesson here is, confidence without knowledge is dangerous, and intimidation only works if you let it. In my case, taking the time to verify the documents turned a seemingly impossible situation into a strategic advantage. Most homeowners would have just driven away, frustrated, and paid the alternate access fine. But knowing the rules gave me leverage, and that leverage became my first real win in this suburban war. Monday morning felt weirdly calm, the kind of calm that usually shows up right before something explodes. I woke up after maybe 3 hours of sleep, poured burnt coffee into a travel mug, grabbed the easement paperwork, and drove straight to the county clerk's office while the sun was barely coming up over the trees. The entire ride there, I kept replaying Clayton's voice in my head. The board determined the easement is no longer enforceable. It still amazed me how casually people will say completely illegal things when they've spent too much time surrounded by other people agreeing with them. The county building itself looked exactly how every county building in America looks. Fluorescent lights, faded tile floors, tired employees carrying stacks of folders thicker than phone books. But the second the clerk read the easement documents, her expression changed immediately. She looked up at me over her glasses and said, "Wait, they physically blocked this access point?" I nodded. She sighed the way nurses sigh when somebody says they inserted a fork into a toaster just to see what would happen. According to standard procedure, she contacted code enforcement while I was still standing there. That's when I realized this situation was already much bigger than the HOA understood. By Wednesday afternoon, a county inspector named Ramirez was standing at the end of my driveway, staring at the fence with both hands on his hips. He walked the property slowly, measuring distances, checking boundary markers, flipping through county maps on a tablet while I stood nearby, trying not to look too satisfied. Finally, he stopped, looked directly at me, and said, "Yeah, they really messed this up." Music to my ears. Then he explained something that completely changed the scale of the disaster. The HOA hadn't just blocked my easement. They had extended the fence several feet into county right-of-way land tied to emergency access for the entire cul-de-sac. I actually blinked at him and said, "Wait, the whole street?" Ramirez nodded. Fire access, utility access, emergency vehicle clearance, all technically compromised now. And folks, let me tell you something, county officials get real interested real fast when emergency access becomes part of the conversation. From a legal perspective, once safety regulations get involved, HOA politics stop mattering almost instantly. Suddenly, this wasn't some petty neighborhood dispute anymore. This was liability, government liability, insurance liability, public access liability, the kind of words that make suburban board members sweat through expensive polo shirts. The county posted an official violation notice on the HOA sign 2 days later, bright orange paper taped right beside their cheerful spring community potluck announcement. I nearly framed a photograph of it. The notice gave them 30 days to remove the obstruction or face escalating daily fines. And this is where things got hilarious. Clayton stopped sounding confident. Suddenly, every voicemail from him had this nervous little edge to it. "We're reviewing legal options. The board requires additional time. We may need another community vote. Buddy, you should have thought about votes before building a medieval border wall across my driveway at midnight." Then the neighborhood gossip machine kicked into full overdrive. See, HOA communities survive on rumors the same way forests survive on rain. By the end of the week, everybody knew something was wrong. Neighbors started slowing their cars near my house, pretending not to stare at the fence. One older woman literally walked her dog past my driveway 3 times in one afternoon. Another guy quietly approached me while I was getting the mail and whispered, "Did they really block county access?" Like we were discussing government secrets during wartime. And the funniest part? Half the neighborhood secretly hated Clayton already. He'd spent years finding people over garbage cans, basketball hoops, garden decorations, and once, this is true, a Christmas wreath he claimed was visually aggressive. So the second residents realized his little power trip might raise everyone's HOA fees, support disappeared overnight. This is a psychological trap authoritarian personalities constantly fall into. They mistake silent resentment for loyalty. People obey until consequences become personal. Then suddenly nobody wants to stand beside the loud guy anymore. About a week later, I came home and saw 3 HOA board members standing near the fence arguing with Ramirez while he pointed at county documents. Clayton looked exhausted, tie crooked, sweat visible under his arms, even though it wasn't hot outside. The second he noticed me pulling in, his entire expression tightened. I got out of the truck slowly, leaned against the door, and just listened. We were acting in the best interests of the community. Clayton snapped at the inspector. Ramirez didn't even blink. The community doesn't supersede county access law. Absolute poetry. Then came my favorite moment. Clayton turned toward me and tried switching tactics completely. Suddenly, he wanted compromise. Suddenly, he wanted civility. "Maybe we can discuss temporary shared access arrangements," he said carefully, like somebody trying to negotiate with a bear holding a gasoline can. I laughed right in front of everybody. "You mean my driveway?" The silence after that was beautiful. One of the board members actually looked down at the ground to avoid eye contact. And honestly, that's when I realized the HOA had already lost. Not legally, that part was obvious. Socially, public embarrassment inside suburban neighborhoods spreads faster than wildfire because reputation is basically the local currency. Every resident now knew the board had overreached so badly they triggered county enforcement. Every resident knew this entire disaster started because Clayton wanted control more than he wanted common sense. But I still wasn't done. Because while the county handled the fence violation, I filed a civil claim separately for trespassing, obstruction of legal access, towing costs, property interference, and emotional distress. Some people told me that was excessive. I disagree. If somebody intentionally blocks your property access to intimidate you, they should absolutely feel consequences beyond, "Please remove the fence." Otherwise, these people never learn. Mediation happened about 6 weeks later inside this bland office building conference room with terrible coffee and fluorescent lighting that made everybody look guilty. Clayton arrived with 2 board members and an attorney who looked deeply tired of representing suburban drama. Their opening argument basically boiled down to "We misunderstood the easement." which was incredible considering they somehow misunderstood it while actively building a fence across it. My attorney slid the county violation report across the table without saying a word. Then came the photographs, the construction timeline, the easement documents, the towing receipts from the nights I had to park half a mile away because access was blocked. Piece by piece, the entire HOA defense collapsed like wet cardboard. At one point, the mediator actually removed his glasses and muttered, "I genuinely don't understand why the board thought this was enforceable." Neither did I, buddy. Neither did I. Eventually, the HOA folded completely. $8,500 in damages. Formal acknowledgement of the easement permanently re-recorded with updated county protections. Mandatory removal costs for the fence. And because the county violation escalated during their delay tactics, the HOA itself got hit with additional fines large enough to increase neighborhood dues for the following year. Oh yeah, the residents loved that part. You could practically feel the hatred radiating off some of those HOA meetings afterward. And the final twist? Since the county clarified the access designation during the dispute, the once private cul-de-sac officially became recognized public access territory connected through the easement corridor, meaning Clayton's desperate little attempt to control one driveway accidentally weakened the exclusivity status of the entire neighborhood entrance. That right there is what I call cinematic irony. Now every time I drive home, tires crunching over the same gravel my grandfather laid decades ago, I slow down just a little near the HOA entrance sign. Sometimes Clayton's outside checking mail or pretending to inspect landscaping while avoiding eye contact with humanity. And every single time, I wave, calmly, politely, like the friendly neighbor he should have been from the beginning. Because nothing irritates power-hungry people more than realizing the person they tried to humiliate ended up enjoying the victory way too much. You know the strangest part about this whole thing? A month after the fence came down, the neighborhood physically looked exactly the same. Same trimmed hedges, same overpriced patio furniture, same retirees power washing already clean driveways at 7 in the morning like it's an Olympic event. If you drove through the cul-de-sac without knowing the story, you'd never guess there had been a full-blown suburban civil war sitting underneath all that fake peacefulness. But for me, something changed permanently after this happened. I stopped looking at HOAs as harmless neighborhood organizations and started seeing them for what they sometimes become when the wrong personalities take control. Tiny political systems where insecure people mistake authority for wisdom. And honestly, I don't even think Clayton originally cared about my driveway that much. That's what makes these situations dangerous. The conflict people see on the surface usually isn't the real conflict underneath. The driveway was symbolic. It represented independence. I was the homeowner who questioned board decisions publicly, the guy who didn't clap during meetings, the one person who refused to nod along every time Clayton introduced another ridiculous community improvement initiative. Guys like that don't forget public resistance. Over time, disagreement starts feeling disrespectful to them. Then eventually they convince themselves punishment is justified because they're protecting the community. This is a psychological trap power structures create everywhere, not just HOAs. The second authority becomes emotional instead of practical. People stop enforcing rules fairly and start using rules to settle personal feelings. And suburban neighborhoods are honestly the perfect breeding ground for it, because everything looks polite on the surface. Nobody screams. Nobody throws punches. Instead, they weaponize paperwork, meetings, notices, fines, and technicalities. It's basically emotional warfare disguised as community management. According to standard procedure, HOA boards are supposed to operate within governing documents and county law, not above them. But the problem is most homeowners never actually verify anything. They see official letterheads, legal phrases, warning notices, and immediately assume resistance is impossible. From a legal perspective, that assumption is exactly why bad boards get away with overreach for years. Intimidation works best against exhausted people. And honestly, modern life keeps most homeowners exhausted enough that fighting back feels impossible. That's why I always tell people now, before you panic, before you comply, before you let somebody bully you with administrative language, read your documents carefully. Check county records. Understand what's actually enforceable versus what somebody merely wants you to believe is enforceable. Because once facts enter the room, fake authority gets real fragile real fast. The lesson here is, Calm persistence terrifies controlling people more than anger ever will. See, Clayton expected one of two reactions from me. Either emotional rage that would make me look unstable, or exhausted surrender that would make him feel powerful. What he didn't expect was paperwork, patience, verification. That's what destroyed him. Not shouting, not threats, just evidence and consequences. And honestly, there's something weirdly satisfying about that. In a world where everybody wants instant revenge, sometimes the most brutal response is simply forcing arrogant people to experience the full weight of their own decisions. Financially, publicly, legally, especially publicly. Because let me tell you something about suburban reputation. People pretend not to care about gossip until they become the gossip. Clayton used to walk around those HOA meetings like a small-town mayor. After the fines hit and neighborhood dues increased, suddenly people stopped laughing at his jokes. Funny how quickly authority disappears when it starts costing everyone money. Even now, every once in a while I'll catch neighbors glancing toward my driveway when they pass by, probably remembering the story, probably wondering whether they'd have fought back the same way or just accepted it. And truthfully, I understand why many people wouldn't. Stress changes people. Legal disputes are exhausting. Conflict invading your home life feels awful, because your home is supposed to be the one place where you can shut the world out for a while. When somebody attacks that feeling of safety, even indirectly, it gets personal fast. But if there's one thing this experience taught me, it's that silence almost always benefits the people abusing authority. The second somebody calmly says, "No, show me where that's legally enforceable," the entire dynamic shifts. So now I want to ask you something honestly. If you came home tomorrow night and found a fence blocking your driveway with some smug HOA notice hanging off the front of it, what would you do? Would you try to negotiate peacefully? Would you hire a lawyer immediately? Or would you grab a chainsaw and accidentally become the neighborhood legend people whisper about during cookouts for the next 20 years? Let me know in the comments, because after living through this mess, I genuinely believe suburban neighborhoods hide some of the wildest power struggles in America. They just happen behind trimmed bushes and decorative mailboxes instead of courtroom cameras. And every time I drive down that gravel driveway now, hearing the tires crunch over stones my grandfather laid with his own hands decades ago, I get reminded of something simple but important. Some things are worth defending, especially when the people trying to take them think you're too intimidated to fight back.